Thank you, sir, for being so precise and yet addressing all the queries. Now we'll open the floor. What we'll do, we'll take questions and comments for the next 20 minutes and then request the panelists towards the end address those queries 2 minutes each or 3 minutes each, depending on the time. Mail, I think we can go till 1:30. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. Kindly raise your hand so that I know how many questions that we have. Okay. I'll start with Brigadier, please, and then ma'am, and then the next.
My question is addressed to Professor Chintamani. You talked about the contradictions in the American rebalancing strategy on various schools. See, there is a perception growing, particularly in Southeast Asia and within the Chinese, that the American rebalancing strategy is losing its steam. Fundamental point is that because that is what is making the Chinese look at the current period as a period of strategic advantage, and they are using this period to reassert their collective power, particularly in the core interest areas of core interest. So, and I've had the privilege of doing 1 or 2 strategic gaming exercises with the Americans, particularly in this region. In almost all those games, the Americans never came to asserting actual military power. It was always posturing and diplomacy. How do you think is going to work? Because that sort of gives even in themselves they are not very convinced the effectiveness of the power. Your comments, please.
Ma'am, please.
I have 2 questions. One is to Professor Chintamani. This is on how does he see the American move to join the East Asia Summit? Wouldn't you see that as a concrete example of the rebalancing of pivot? Because from what I gathered at that time, since I was dealing with ASEAN and ES at that time, it was a very, I would say not sudden, but a very considered change on the part of America from arguing that they were already in APEC and sufficiently involved and so on and it happened fairly rapidly. And I believe it also happened in reaction to increased Chinese assertiveness in the region. That's my question to you. And to Ambassador Bhadrakumar, I have a particular question on Russia. President Putin in October 2011 talked about a Russian-led Eurasian Union. Of course, it hasn't had much traction, nor has it taken off. But in a way, it fits into the thesis that they would be both European and an Asian power. But my question to you is there any traction at all to this idea? Because my experience again in dealing with ASEM, where the European Union has been very keen to in some way build that link with ASEAN and come as a united group, has never worked because it's too large a grouping. In a sense, Asia is already so large. How do you then add on all of Europe to it? So these are my 2 specific questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Venkat, please.
There's more an observation for Professor Mahapatra to respond to. So it's interesting because I agree with you that the entire pivot and rebalancing seems to be more seriously taken, especially in India, when the Americans announced it. But to actually write it off and say that the officials in the second term of the Obama administration don't consider the Asia Pacific as important, I think that probably, I would like you to clarify on that point, because definitely the Asia Pacific continues to be important. Are the Americans actually trying to, refresh sort of old partner alliances simply because they are so economically tied to the Chinese that they can't afford an open confrontation unlike the Soviet Union? So I just want to know in terms of, the priority, have they also got distracted with other regions?
Thank you. Sahil, please. I have Portia and Dr. Kesavan in my list. If there are any others, kindly let me know.
I have a question.
Please.
My question is addressed to Ambassador Bhadrakumar. Sir, in the event of a conflict arising in South China Sea between China and its neighbors, what would be the possible posture by Moscow towards China and its neighbors.
For sure.
So my question is to Professor Mahapatra. So this is again with reference to the interpretations of the pivot that you provided us. So about 2 months back, Dr. Ashley Tellis had addressed us in this very auditorium, and he had clarified that the intention of the rebalance strategy is to befriend India as a strategic partner. In fact, he also said that the China factor is secondary vis-a-vis India. Your comments on this, sir? Thank you.
Professor Kesan, please.
See, this is only a brief comment on the references made by Professor Mahapatra to Senkaku and also American obligation. See, if my understanding is correct, American obligation runs as follows. Article 5 of the US-Japan Security Pact says that it will go to defend any territory which is under the administrative control of Japan. Americans right from the beginning have always stated that they will never get into the merits or demerits of the sovereignty issue. Therefore, I don't think there is any great ambivalence or ambiguity about that. I think even last month also, I think the Defense Secretary clearly said that US would stand by Japan as far as the defense of the islands is concerned. So I think they have really held on to that view right from the day first.
Thank you.
My question is to Professor Chintamani Mahapatra. Sir, in this entire scheme of rebalancing to Asia Pacific, sir, what is United States expecting from India to play its roles or responsibilities? Sir?
Okay. Please, ma'am. Okay. What we'll do, we'll return to the panel now. If there are more queries, we'll take them in the second round. I'll start with Ambassador Vadrakumar. I also have a query to you on Russia-China relations, especially relating to West Asia and Afghanistan. That there is a general perception that China would invest more in Afghanistan. What would be the Russian response towards Chinese investment and interventions in Central Asia and Russia and Afghanistan? Would that be in their interest? So.
I think Professor is much in demand. I'm not, so I can quickly respond. First is the Eurasian Union. If you recollect, there's a famous statement by Putin that the collapse of the USSR was a geopolitical disaster. And the search for the European Union is an offshoot of that sense of tragedy and anguish. But it also has a strong security dimension in the sense that Russia would like to integrate this space, not to revive the USSR, but at the same time to create a cordon where it has a line of defense. Now, what is happening in Ukraine has obviously many dimensions, but one dimension is this, to divest Russia of this defense line. And Eurasian Union project is simply inconceivable without Ukraine being part of it. It loses something very important without Ukraine being in it. There was a television interview, Fox News interview, yesterday's Sunday interviews in the US. Robert Gates gave a very good analysis of this, of what is actually motivating Obama on the Ukraine crisis. And it is this, that this is the point where the Americans have to take a line and to frustrate the Russian effort to rebuild that cordon, because then Russia will have a sense of vulnerability. Russia will keep to itself and not come into theaters where traditionally it's not been active, like Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East and so on. Even in the Cold War era, it was a very circumscribed Russian role. But now Russia is all over the place, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, everywhere Russia is there. So pushing them back, this is the idea. And Eurasian Union's prospects are going to be settled on what happens in Ukraine. If Ukraine doesn't become part of the European Union and retains its identity as a neutral country, Russians, I think, will settle for a Finlandization of Ukraine. Russia doesn't want to absorb Ukraine. But if it remains like in Austria, the 1955 Austrian Treaty, or like Finland, Russian objective is met with. It should not be integrated into European Union, because then the next logical step is it becomes a NATO member country. And that brings the NATO to the borders, right to the borders of Russia, US missile defense system and the whole works. So this is what is going on. And what we are going to see in Ukraine, this will largely condition the Russian attitude towards European Union project, Eurasian Union project, and the prospect of the project itself. As far as Russia and Chinese role in Afghanistan and Central Asia are concerned, actually, you see, the Western commentators often say that Russians are greatly worried about the Chinese inroads into the Central Asian energy market and so on. But actually, you look at it from the Russian point of view. From the Russian point of view, it is better that the Central Asian energy flows to China rather than compete with the Russian supplies in Europe. And not many people, in fact, even know this, that Russian companies, in fact, constructed the Central Asia pipeline from Turkmenistan to Xinjiang. So they have a clearing house, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is usefully serving the purpose of this contradiction of Russia's traditional influence there, its ambition to preserve that influence there, and at the same time China's entry, and not as a sphere of influence but a big presence of China. And then the two countries also have a congruence of interest in ensuring the stability of that region. They are both equally interested in fighting extremism, separatism, and these kind of tendencies. And in Afghanistan, again, they are not working at cross purposes at all. At a later date, depending on how these tendencies develop, one cannot say how it will develop. But for the moment, I think they are not on a collision course. The South China Sea brings up actually the question of Russia-China relationship. As I hinted, it is full of ambivalences, that relationship. And it will be neither side actually desires an alliance. And they are not in a situation where one automatically goes and supports the other on all issues. In 2008, in the Georgian War, when in Ossetia and Abkhazia, there was a deafening silence in China. And China's stance is very, very nuanced on Ukraine. It has stopped well short. It is allowing the Chinese, the propaganda machinery to blast the West for having Cold War mindset and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it stops short. Question of territorial integrity, question of sovereignty is become of paramount importance for China. So it's not automatically a question. And again, when Shinzo Abe visited the shrine, Russia's reaction was very muted. Russia gave a very, very pro forma reaction to it only. So China desires, in fact, that Russia and China should mutually support on their territorial disputes in the Asia-Pacific region. That is Russia's Kuril Island thing and Senkaku Island, China's side. But Russians have not responded to that. So it's a very nuanced relationship. If you take trade, for example, it is primary materials which are going to China. And China is buying, Russia is buying, on the other hand, manufactured things and so on. However much Russia tries to push for high-tech items, it's not working. Military supplies have virtually ended, and there's in a foreseeable future, China can even be a competitor for Russia. So this is a kind of relationship. I don't give much credence to this vast expanse of Siberia and the Yellow Peril and all that, because China has also been very careful not to push, and I believe the latest statistics as in the Russian press shows that the Chinese presence actually of Chinese nationals in this area is going down, because it's very hard to live in that area. And across the border on the Chinese side, as one Russian reported, when the nighttime comes across the river from Missouri, when you look at the Chinese side, all neon lights and these cities are shining, and the Russian side looks so backward and poor in comparison. Who would like to go and slow it out, when there is so much action on that, and that's also very heavily industrialized part of China. So this yellow peril business is a vague propaganda. I don't think Chinese are looking for that kind of thing. China wants, in fact, the Siberia and Far East to be a powerhouse for their economy in the sense for supplying raw materials. And that is where Russia is trying to have a meaningful relationship with Japan. Russia would like to diversify. Russia wouldn't like such a big dominant Chinese presence there. Russia would like to have Japan and South Korea there also as well. But then the island dispute is there, and movement on that can't be as quickly as one would like it. Japanese are also very keen on it, on getting this out of the way so that the Russian role in the Asia-Pacific region can be more optimal from their point of view in terms of a balancing. Incidentally, this balancing, this has always been part of the strategic thinking on the part of the Russians, that Russia can be a balancer between the West and China. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'll be brief and to the point. Hopefully we have some more time for some more questions. I'll make the observations in such a way that I'll try to answer all the questions, and let me try with this. Is Asia-Pacific important to the United States? Very, very important. After all, they fought the Korean War here, they fought the Vietnam War here, $500 billion plus annual trade between the two, heavy American investment in Asia-Pacific. America does more trade with Asia-Pacific than with Europe, and this is an extremely important area economically, politically, and militarily. Now, that is one of the reasons why the Americans don't want to lose out and be part of all the important regional cooperative mechanism in Southeast Asia. A long time ago, I did some archival research and found out how even the very birth of ASEAN, it was the Americans who played the role of a midwife. And I wrote a book on that. So when it came to EAS, Americans were out. A little before that, in the wake of the end of the Cold War, when the APEC forum was first floated by the Australians, America was out. Washington was angry and furious, and they somehow get crashed and they became part of APEC and took the lead. Same thing in East Asia Economic Caucus. Americans were kept out of it, and they engineered in such a way that this would not take off the ground. That Economic Caucus did not take off the ground. In case of East Asia Summit, again, Russia, America were all out. In fact, there are so many open statements saying that how can America be out of EAS? And they again lobbied very strongly, and they became part of EAS. And because of the importance of Asia Pacific, they don't want to be left out. Then why are they posturing and doing diplomacy rather than making very clear that they want to maintain their primacy and contain the Chinese ambition? It is all because, I'm developing a new concept called cold conflict between China and the USA. The Cold War, the classical Cold War that we saw between the two, is not possible simply because there are 50,000+ Americans living in Hong Kong, doing business there, more than 1,000 joint ventures in China, and then the Chinese trade surplus and the American investment. They cannot fight a traditional Cold War because the Soviet Union did not have that kind of economic interdependence with the United States. That is why the cold confrontation, that is why the posturing. And I would say the game of chicken that Americans and Chinese are now playing, like Cowpens incident that took place in December 13. Cowpens, the American aircraft carrier, just about 100 meters away, they found 3 Chinese ships. And who is going to budge first? And it could have been a dangerous collision. Americans burst first and all. So they don't want to fight a war, but they just want to posture. Another reason why they are just again diplomacy and posturing, because Americans are worried that this rebalancing strategy actually has sparked up more tension in Southeast Asia than it was before. And in fact, the Chinese are responding to American declaration of a rebalancing strategy and all. They're not very happy with the kind of nationalism we are witnessing in Japan. They're not very happy with the kind of statements coming from Philippines, comparing Xi Jinping with Nazi Germany and all that. And the way even our Japanese Prime Minister visiting that Yasukuni shrine, they want to come back, they want to reinforce their relationship with allies, but they don't want the allies to create more problem for the Americans. That is happening. That is why they're just posturing, and ultimately the outcome is going to be cold conflict, which is not going to escalate into a major confrontation between the two powers. Then, what do they want from India? There is no doubt about it that they very much keep India in the Asia rebalancing strategy. The new defense guidelines that was issued in December 2012, I think, before the Obama's second term began, India happened to be the only country which was named in that report. Even earlier, when this Asia pivot strategy was announced, India was very much mentioned as part of the report. And in fact, the American Defense Secretary came to IDSA, gave a lecture, and he used the term, India is a linchpin of American rebalancing strategy in Asia. Whether we like it, we dislike it, we don't know. Government of India has not responded openly to this particular thing. We are debating the one, but from the American side, there is heavy expectation that India should play an important role in this. In fact, when the Indian strategic community interact with, second track level with the American ones, not once but many times the Americans want India to be, quote unquote, their term, a security provider in the Indian Ocean. It is India which is saying, backtracking, saying that no, we don't want to play any leadership role in this. But the Americans very much want India to play that kind of leadership role. And why this expectation? Because they think that if you see the geography of India and China, the civilization of the two countries, the number of people, the amount of resources, and the amount of diplomatic abilities and the military capability, India probably can be a better balancer to China than Japan or Philippines or South Korea or Australia. That is why they have expectation. But whether those expectations are going to be belied or not, partly it depends on India. Final point on US-Japan treaty. Yes. Whenever there is a problem, the Americans would definitely come to the help of Japan, as the treaty says. Interestingly, the same treaty would not say that if America is fighting a war with somebody, then Japan would automatically come and participate with America. That is the key problem. That is why now they're egging on Prime Minister Abe to bring about certain amendment in the constitution where Japan can be part of collective defense or if necessary collective attack. Abe has visited 30 countries in the first year. Now he is committing some kind of defense equipment cell and defense cooperation with Cambodia, with Vietnam, with ASEAN countries. So it is all because of American prompting. Play a more and more security role in this particular region because they want Japan to be, quote unquote, a normal country where Japan can, without any problem, participate in a military operation with the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ambassador Badra Kumar, I think you put a very interesting proposition of the Russian ambivalence. I quite clearly see that, for instance, in the SCO, Russia wants India as a sort of balancer to China to whatever extent it is. And as you said very rightly, in Asia Pacific wants to deal with Japan or engage with Japan and South Korea again in order to maintain a balance. But why are the Russians so hesitant in working with India in Afghanistan? I have not been able to understand because I find they have been reasonably cold to whatever Russian initiatives were. A second small question to Chintamani. You said, I know that it's said India is a linchpin. Panetta went to Korea and said the same thing, Korea is a linchpin. Obviously, South Korea and India are not comparable in any way. I have gone and talked to many people in Pentagon on what role they want out of India. And they say we want India to be a security provider in Indian Ocean, at least in the Bay of Bengal and all that. Now, having said that, they really don't want India to have a leadership role, even in South Asia. Look at their approach to Maldives on the sofa, where we had very serious differences with them. Look at their approach to Bangladesh recently, in terms of Hasina's elections or thus. I can reel out half a dozen other instances in case of Nepal. There are examples in Sri Lanka. Now, this is India's soft belly. I mean, India's real periphery, where the Americans are taking initiatives which are not compatible with whatever India thinks rightly or wrongly. Now, how do you make that they are really sincere in making India a security provider in this part of the world?
Briefly, sir.
Okay. You see, the Afghanistan thing cannot be understood if we stick to our stereotyped opinion about Pakistan. The fact is that if you delink yourself from that mindset and look at it, Pakistan is a player in Afghanistan. And no, that is a different, we are now getting into polemics. But the point is that there are substantive level, a Pakistani response is an imperative need for any country, regional player or other, even European powers, even NATO, which is seriously engaged in Afghanistan. Because as far as Russia is concerned, at the intelligence level, it is getting inputs from Pakistan about the movement of people to North Caucasus. China is also getting in terms of it. So from their point of view, they have a certain sectarian interest there. That is number one. And therefore you should remember that even in the period of the jihad in 1980s, Soviet Union had more to do with Pakistan over the Afghan problem, even in terms of the Soviet pullout from Afghanistan, Kordovay and all that mission at that time, than with India. So that continues to be like that, and it is not something which is typical of the Russians. It is also holding good for the Americans, holding good for Iranians, holding good for certainly Europeans and China. So we need to come to terms with this aspect of it. It is not a contradiction in Russia-India relationship, but it is simply that Pakistan is a heavyweight when it comes to the Afghan problem. Its resolution, its topical issues, its aberrations, its spin-offs, everything, there is a certain calibration that Pakistan can bring about, and that affects their vital national interests of security. It is that, as simple as that. Now, on the other question about you see, the thing is this, that it is never been, even when there was ideological affinity in the Soviet era, ostensibly there was an ideological affinity, and why the discord developed, and though we came to know later, but that why the discord developed at such an early stage of the development of that relationship, going back to the time when Mao Zedong was made to cool his heels in Moscow by Stalin. So it is a very complicated relationship. Russia's annexation of Chinese territory is fairly recent happening in modern history, and border settlement has taken place, but it is still working in the Russian mind whether there is a total degree of acceptability on the part of China. I don't think China is going to send an army to reclaim the territory, but I'm only flagging that it is a very complex relationship. Today, again, you see what is happening is increasingly, even as we are talking, even when today passes, the difference between Russia and China is growing. And Russia is not used to dealing with China as a junior partner, whereas already China has started dealing with Russia as a junior partner. For example, in the relationship between Russia and the United States, Russia would like China to be brought into it, whereas China has absolutely no interest and no intentions of involving Russia in developing the so-called new type of relationship with the United States. And then if you take the trade, it is heavily in China's favor, and Russia just doesn't have the capacity to send anything else, because China is tomorrow going to compete with Russia even on nuclear industry, nuclear power plants. It is going to compete on military exports. So what is this high-tech stuff that Russia can export to China? That is also not there. So, when you look at it like this, the Russian dilemma is very acute. In fact, the Americans could have been a little kinder to Russia, because all that the Russians are seeking is an accommodation by the West. in a common European home. And because they are very acutely conscious of, the uncertainties that tomorrow is holding out. But for the Americans, entry of Russia into the European camp is fraught with great dangers. It erodes the transatlantic leadership and so on. And so it's a much, much bigger question. And in fact, today you find this all manifesting over Ukraine. Angela Merkel is extremely reluctant to go on this route of sanctions. And Americans are threatening the Europeans that you have to fall in line and have the sanctions. So you see, already this is all manifesting, and creating an image of Russia, enemy image of Russia, is very, very difficult for the Americans today. So it could have been possible if the Americans had a more enlightened approach towards Russia than one imbued with triumphalism that communism died and Soviet Union collapsed.
Thank you, sir.
I'll be very, very brief. Sir, Indo-US strategic partnership has gone into rough weather. It's not just because Americans are taking a different position on Bangladesh and Maldives alone. They also have a lot of complaints against India, saying that they invested a lot of time, energy into this nuclear deal, and it is not taking off the ground. Number two, they have a lot of complaints about this multi-role aircraft cell, saying that unlike the Russians, we don't sell weapons on the basis of transaction. It is driven by strategic consideration, and you dissed us. And number three, they say that India is not reforming its economy. It's not opening up the retail trade. It is curtailing American entry into the Indian market. So it is both ways. It has really got into rough weather. I was just saying the American expectation, and those expectations have been belied. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I thank both Professor Chintamani Mahapatra and Ambassador Bhadrakumar. It's almost like playing a T20 match on two great countries and two great speakers in 1 hour plus. Thank you, sir, for that brilliant and crisp presentation, and I also thank Floor for that intervention. Now let me hand the floor over to Aditi.
I would like to thank the panelists for their really incisive views and informed perspectives from both the very interesting countries. We now break for lunch. Please requesting you all to join us for lunch at the greenhouse, and requesting you all to please reassemble at 2:20. Thank you.